Vivian Sterling sat alone in her modest London townhouse, the afternoon sunlight filtering weakly through the dusty curtains. In her hands, she held a letter that seemed to carry the weight of the entire world. The envelope bore the unmistakable seal of the Duke of Ravenrest, a man whose name alone stirred whispers across every drawing room and salon in the city. Her pulse quickened as she broke the wax seal, her fingers trembling slightly. The words inside were direct, almost chilling in their practicality. The Duke proposed a marriage, strictly a business arrangement, temporary in nature, with promises of financial security and freedom from her late father's crushing debts. No romance. No emotional entanglement. Only terms, conditions, and the promise of safety. At 24, Vivian had long resigned herself to the quiet desperation of spinsterhood. Society had already written her off: no dowry, a father's debts, and a life that seemed destined for quiet obscurity. Yet here was an opportunity she had never dared to imagine, a chance to claim her independence and step out of the shadow of financial ruin. Still, the risks were immense. The Duke was known for his icy demeanor and meticulous control over everything in his life. Marrying him, even temporarily, meant surrendering herself to a man who valued strategy over sentiment. Could she trust him to honor the terms? What if his cold precision masked a darker, more capricious nature? Her maid appeared softly at the doorway, holding a tray of tea. "Miss Vivian, shall I pour?" She nodded, her mind still racing. "Yes, thank you." As the warm aroma of tea filled the room, Vivian stared down at the letter once more. This could be her salvation, or the start of a life far more complicated than she had ever imagined. That evening, with candlelight flickering across her small study, she set pen to paper. Each word she wrote carried the weight of a decision that could reshape her future entirely. The choice was clear: accept the Duke's terms and gamble everything, or remain in the slow suffocation of her current existence. Vivian's hand trembled slightly as she read the Duke's swift reply. Her carefully worded condition, placing her settlement in trust, had been accepted without hesitation. The marriage would take place in a week, small and private, with witnesses only, and the practical arrangements would begin immediately. The reality of it all settled heavily over her. In 7 days, she would be bound to a man she had never met, stepping into a world of wealth, power, and unknown dangers. The next afternoon, precisely at 2 o'clock, a sleek black carriage arrived outside her modest townhouse. Vivian watched from the drawing-room window as the Duke descended, tall, impeccably dressed, his movements precise, almost commanding. There was a gravity to him, a presence that seemed to bend the room to his control. Dark hair neatly styled, piercing eyes like a stormy sky, and an aura that was both imposing and unreadable. "Is the Duke here, miss?" her maid whispered, her voice betraying a flicker of awe. Vivian straightened, smoothing the folds of her deep blue silk dress. "Show him in, please." The Duke entered with a quiet authority that filled the room instantly. Up close, he was even more striking: angular features, lean build, and a gaze that assessed everything, and everyone, with meticulous precision. But it was the lack of warmth in his expression that caught Vivian off guard. Cool, controlled, and entirely unreadable. "Lady Sterling," he said, inclining his head in a bow that was formal yet distant. "I trust you have had time to consider the arrangement fully." "I have, Your Grace," Vivian replied, returning a precise curtsy. "We are in agreement. This is a business arrangement, nothing more." "Excellent," he said, his tone crisp. "Please, sit." For the next hour, they worked through the details of their contract-like partnership. From her living arrangements at Ravencrest Hall to the etiquette expected in public appearances, nothing was left unspoken. Vivian listened carefully, noting every requirement and expectation, her mind racing with the implications of her new life. She was stepping into a world of rigid protocol and unyielding authority, yet within that world lay the promise of security she had never dared to imagine. By the time the Duke rose to leave, Vivian felt a strange mixture of apprehension and determination. The path ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in years, she held the reins of her own destiny, even if only through careful negotiation and the unlikeliest of alliances. Vivian took a slow, steadying breath as she smoothed the folds of her ivory silk gown, the fabric cool against her fingertips. The morning was draped in grey drizzle, the kind of weather that blurred the edges of the city and seemed to hold its breath along with her. Today, she would walk into a life she had never imagined, a marriage forged not from love, but necessity. She recalled the details of their meeting, the Duke's precise, businesslike explanation of their arrangement. She would have her own suite, her own staff, and freedom to live her life within the household as long as she caused no scandal. He spent most of his time in London, leaving her largely to herself except for necessary public appearances. Even the terms of their 2-year agreement had been laid bare, a marriage of convenience, carefully circumscribed, with annulment promised on grounds of non-consummation. When she had asked why he needed this arrangement, his composure had faltered ever so slightly. A clause in his grandfather's will demanded marriage before his 32nd birthday, or else the estate, his family legacy and the livelihoods of hundreds, would be at risk. Vivian had glimpsed, for the briefest moment, frustration or something darker behind the cold mask. And then, just as quickly, it was gone. He had chosen her for her intelligence, discretion, and circumstances. She was unlikely to cause scandal or mistake the arrangement for romance. His words had stung, a blunt reminder that her reduced means somehow made her a suitable candidate for this union. Yet she had answered with composure, reassuring him that she understood the strictly business nature of their marriage. Now, on the morning of the wedding, those words echoed in her mind. She was about to step into Ravencrest Hall, into the orbit of a man whose life had been measured in contracts, obligations, and calculated distance. Yet, beneath his austere exterior, there had been a flicker of something, perhaps hesitation, perhaps restraint, perhaps a hint of hidden vulnerability. She had resolved it was not her concern. Her focus must remain on the practical, the freedom and security this marriage would provide, and the promise that in 2 years she would be free. Vivian smoothed her gown one last time, lifting her chin. The carriage would arrive soon. As the rain tapped gently against the window, she felt a flutter of anticipation, and, despite herself, a curious sense of wonder. She was about to marry a man she barely knew, yet something about the unknown ahead made her pulse quicken. Today marked the beginning of a life that was hers to navigate, a delicate balance of caution, strategy, and, perhaps, unexpected discovery. Vivian took a steadying breath as her maid whispered softly beside her, "You look radiant today, miss. I only wish your mother could see you." She touched the pearl necklace resting against her collarbone, the last piece of her mother's jewelry she had been able to keep. "As do I," Vivian murmured, a bittersweet smile on her lips. She knew her mother would have had strong opinions about this marriage of convenience, yet somehow, she imagined her mother's pride shining through. At precisely 9:30, the Duke's carriage arrived. Deep blue, polished to a mirror-like finish, the Ravencrest crest emblazoned proudly on the doors. Vivian squared her shoulders, gathering every ounce of courage, and stepped into the carriage. The drive to St. George's was quiet, the rhythmic clatter of wheels against cobblestones filling the space between them. Across from her, Nathaniel sat composed, dark blue tailcoat immaculate, silver waistcoat gleaming. His expression remained unreadable, though every so often their eyes met, and she thought she glimpsed the faintest trace of something, perhaps hesitation, behind his carefully maintained calm. "Are you having second thoughts?" he asked suddenly, voice low but precise. "No," she answered without hesitation. "Are you?" He paused, and she noticed a subtle tightness around his eyes. "No," he said, though the single word carried more nuance than he admitted. Inside the church, the ceremony was swift, almost mechanical. The clergyman's tone lacked warmth, delivering the vows with the detachment of a ledger entry. When Nathaniel slid the ring onto her finger, a sapphire encircled by delicate diamonds, heirloom quality, Vivian felt a small, unexpected flutter of something resembling hope. The choice of a family piece suggested thoughtfulness beneath his stern exterior, a consideration she had not anticipated. "For appearances," he murmured as they prepared for the kiss, lips brushing for the briefest moment. Vivian responded with a quiet, "Of course." Yet the contact lingered a heartbeat longer than necessity dictated, leaving both slightly unsettled by the tiny spark it ignited. "Congratulations, Your Grace," the clergyman intoned, and Vivian realized, with a mix of disbelief and inevitability, that she was now the Duchess of Ravenrest. They signed the final documents with the same businesslike precision that had marked their entire arrangement, and stepped back into the drizzly London morning. Nathaniel offered her his arm with formal courtesy. "Well, Your Grace," he said, and though his tone was polite, there was a subtle hint of irony in how he used her new title. Vivian took his arm, her heart steadying as she allowed herself the smallest, fleeting thought, perhaps this new life, bound by contracts and necessity, held room for something she had never expected. "Shall we proceed to your new home?" Nathaniel asked, his voice as measured and formal as ever. "Lead the way, Your Grace," Vivian replied, matching his tone, though inside she felt a flutter of nerves she couldn't quite name. The carriage rolled steadily through the streets of London, then out into the countryside, and Vivian found herself stealing glances at her husband. She reminded herself firmly that their brief kiss at the ceremony had been purely ceremonial, nothing more. Yet every time her eyes met his, she felt a stir of curiosity she hadn't expected, an awareness that this marriage, though convenient and strictly business, might already be more complex than she had imagined. The journey to Ravencrest Hall stretched on through the golden hues of autumn, the countryside unfolding in rolling hills, amber fields, and copper forests. Nathaniel spent much of the time absorbed in letters and documents, his focus absolute, yet occasionally, he would notice her watching and give the faintest, almost imperceptible acknowledgement before returning to his work. "You seem surprised by something," he remarked at one such moment, setting aside his papers. "I was thinking about your estate," Vivian said cautiously. "You mentioned it employs hundreds of people. It must be quite large." "Ravencrest Hall has been in my family for over 2 centuries," he replied, and there was the first trace of warmth in his voice. "Nearly 10,000 acres, including farmland, forests, and villages. I've always considered it my responsibility to see that it thrives." Vivian studied him, noticing the subtle passion in his tone, something entirely absent from his discussion of business or social obligations. "You care for it deeply," she said softly. His expression tightened for a moment, as though revealing even that small flicker of genuine feeling had been a misstep. "It is my duty," he said stiffly, returning to his letters. But Vivian had seen the truth in his eyes. Beneath the cold, precise exterior lay a man who loved what mattered to him. She filed the observation carefully, knowing it might matter later. As the afternoon light faded into the soft glow of evening, the terrain grew rugged and wild. Trees arched over narrow roads, casting shadows that stretched across the carriage wheels. Then, cresting a hill, Vivian caught her first sight of Ravencrest Hall. She gasped. The manor was vast, built of golden stone that caught the last rays of sunlight, with towers that seemed to pierce the sky and countless windows that glimmered like jewels. Gardens, geometric and meticulously maintained, stretched toward parkland that rolled endlessly to the horizon. "It's magnificent," she whispered, unable to hide her awe. Nathaniel's gaze followed hers, and for a rare moment, his usual composure softened. "Yes," he murmured quietly. The carriage continued up the long drive, and Vivian could see the first household staff emerging to meet them, their movements precise and orderly. The enormity of her new life began to settle in, not just the grandeur of the estate, but the responsibility, the expectation, and the delicate balance of independence and constraint that awaited her behind its doors. Vivian stepped carefully down the carriage steps, smoothing the skirts of her gown as the household staff gathered to greet them. Word of the Duke's marriage had clearly travelled ahead. Every face, from the butler to the youngest footman, turned to welcome her. "They will expect a united front," Nathaniel remarked quietly as the carriage came to a halt. "The staff has served my family for generations. They value loyalty and reputation." "I understand," Vivian replied, straightening her posture and preparing to perform the role of the composed, gracious Duchess. Nathaniel's hand lingered on hers longer than strictly necessary as he helped her down, and she caught the faintest flicker of warmth in his grey eyes. "Welcome home, Vivian," he said. Though addressed to her for appearances, there was a subtle sincerity beneath the formal tone. The next hour passed in a whirlwind of introductions and orientation. The dignified butler greeted her with formal courtesy, the housekeeper with genuine warmth, and each staff member seemed eager to gauge the new Duchess. "Your chambers have been prepared as His Grace requested," the housekeeper explained, leading Vivian through the grand halls. "You have a sitting room, bedchamber, and dressing room, all with views of the gardens. His Grace thought the east wing would suit you best for morning light." The rooms themselves were spacious and elegant, a seamless mix of luxury and comfort. French doors opened onto a balcony overlooking the gardens, the autumn sun casting a golden glow across polished surfaces. "It's lovely," Vivian said sincerely. "Please thank His Grace for his thoughtfulness." "You may thank him yourself at dinner, Your Grace," the housekeeper replied with a smile. "He has requested a more intimate setting for your first evening, dinner at 8. Alone at last, Vivian stepped onto the balcony, taking in the crisp air and trying to process the vast change in her life. This morning she had been a modest lady, facing uncertainty. Now she was Duchess of Ravenrest, mistress of one of England's grandest estates, married to a man as enigmatic as he was commanding. Though she had achieved wealth, status, and security, uncertainty thrummed through her. Nathaniel had been clear, this marriage was business. Yet, moments today, the glance at his estate, the careful help from the carriage, his understated welcome, had hinted at something more behind the cold exterior. She told herself firmly that it was foolish to read meaning into gestures meant for propriety. By evening, dressed in deep emerald silk that highlighted her eyes, Vivian joined Nathaniel in the small dining room. Though intimate compared to the grand hall, it was still lavish. Candlelight flickered across richwood paneling, shadows dancing elegantly. Nathaniel stood near the fireplace, glass in hand, dressed formally. The attire emphasized his lean frame and sharp features. "Good evening, Your Grace," he said with a bow. "I trust your chambers meet your expectations." "They are beautiful," Vivian replied, accepting the wine he offered. "The garden views are especially lovely." "They were designed by my grandmother," he said, the first personal note he had volunteered. She believed gardens should offer beauty and solace, a refuge from the world. She sounds remarkable, Vivian said, genuinely curious. She was, Nathaniel replied quietly, expression softening briefly. She valued peace and elegance above all else. And do you find solace there? She asked, before she could stop herself. His gaze tightened momentarily, as though the question had pierced a careful armor. I find the gardens well-maintained and aesthetically pleasing, he said, returning swiftly to his formal tone. Dinner proceeded with refined courtesy, each course showcasing the estate's exceptional staff. Conversation remained cautious, both adhering to the agreed emotional distance. The estate seems very well managed, Vivian commented during the fish course. The grounds are beautiful, and the staff devoted. I have worked hard to ensure Ravenrest remains profitable, Nathaniel said. The people who depend on it must be cared for. It is a responsibility I take seriously. You inherited the title very young, she observed. It must have been overwhelming. 18 is young for such responsibilities, he admitted, a brief shadow crossing his features. But I had excellent advisors, and I was determined not to fail the estate or its people. And your parents? The accident must have been devastating, she ventured, sensing a depth of experience that shaped him. Nathaniel's hand wavered over his wine glass, his composure tightening. I prefer not to discuss them, he said, controlled but edged with unhealed pain. Vivian's voice softened. I didn't mean to pry. You were not prying, he said, stiff but patient. Curiosity is natural. I simply find certain subjects difficult to revisit. His brief moment of vulnerability had surprised both of them. He busied himself with his meal, though Vivian detected a profound loneliness in his tone, a wound left by the early loss of his parents and the weight of the dukedom. Perhaps you could show me more of the estate tomorrow, she suggested, steering the conversation to safer ground. I'd love to see the grounds and meet some of the tenants. If you wish, he said, relief faint in his voice. Though estate matters can be tedious for those not directly involved. Vivian smiled, undeterred. On the contrary. I find it quite a compliment or a critique, he said carefully, leaning back in his chair. Then, almost imperceptibly, the edge of formality softened. I am invested because it must be done correctly. The livelihood of hundreds depends on the land, the buildings, the work of everyone who lives here. Mistakes can be costly, not just financially, but for people's lives. Vivian nodded slowly, absorbing the weight behind his words. I can see why you devote yourself so completely to the estate. It's more than property, it's a community. Nathaniel's gaze flickered toward her, a hint of something human breaking through the usual cool composure. Exactly. And it requires vigilance. Responsibility is a constant companion here, there is no room for neglect. She felt a pang of empathy, realizing that the man she had married, stoic, precise, and seemingly impervious, carried burdens few could comprehend. I can understand why this life would leave little time for anything else, she said softly. For leisure, he supplied, almost reluctantly. Yes. I ride each morning on Thunder, my stallion, but even then it is rarely for pleasure alone. It is inspection, oversight, sometimes necessary travel between fields or villages. There is rarely a moment to simply exist. His voice dropped slightly, and Vivian could sense the faintest tremor in his usual steadiness. I imagine that must be isolating, she murmured, choosing her words carefully. To shoulder so much without someone to share it with. Nathaniel's eyes met hers briefly, and for a heartbeat, she glimpsed something raw and unguarded. Then the steel returned. Isolation is a luxury I cannot afford. Duty comes first. Everything else, relationships, sentiment, must fit around it. Vivian stayed silent, respecting the line he had drawn, yet her heart ached for the man before her, so capable and accomplished, yet so alone. Shall we begin the tour? He asked after a moment, standing and extending his hand. I will show you the grounds, the villages, and the heart of the estate. You may witness firsthand what it is that occupies nearly all of my time. She took his hand, a small thrill of anticipation running through her. I would very much like that, Your Grace. And I would like to meet some of the tenants as well, if that is acceptable. His lips curved just slightly. It is acceptable. But I warn you, the work can be tedious, the discussions detailed. I suspect you are prepared for patience. On the contrary, Vivian replied, a spark of genuine curiosity in her tone. I find it fascinating. He studied her for a moment, as if weighing the sincerity of her words, then nodded once. Very well. We will begin with the lower fields, where drainage improvements are needed, and then continue to the villages and farmland. It will be a long walk, but I believe it is the most thorough way to understand Ravencrest. As they left the office together, Vivian took in the expanse of the estate, the late autumn sun casting a warm glow over fields, forests, and the distant cottages. Here, in the heart of his world, Nathaniel seemed transformed, less the austere, detached duke, and more a man whose life, for better or worse, had been built entirely around duty, loyalty, and the care of those who depended upon him. And Vivian, walking beside him, felt a quiet curiosity stir, a desire to see not only the estate, but the man himself, beyond the armor of title and expectation. Nathaniel's grey eyes widened, the usual mask of composure faltering for the briefest moment. He looked away, jaw tight, hands clenching slightly at his sides. Vivian held her breath, unsure if she had overstepped, unsure if the walls he had built around himself would crumble or slam shut entirely. After a long pause, he finally spoke, his voice low and uneven, almost hesitant. "You see me. All of it. Not the title, not the obligations, but the man beneath." "I do," Vivian said softly, taking a cautious step closer. The wind teased strands of her hair across her face, and the sun dipped low, casting a warm glow over the hills behind them. "I see the weight you carry, and the care you put into everything you do. I see the loneliness you hide, and the way you give so much of yourself to those who depend on you." For a moment, Nathaniel said nothing. He simply let the words settle between them, his storm-grey eyes darkening with an emotion he could not, or would not, name. Then, finally, he exhaled, a long, shuddering breath that seemed to carry more than air, years of frustration, isolation, and unspoken longing. "Perhaps I have been too cautious," he murmured, almost to himself. "Perhaps I have convinced myself that happiness, connection, those are luxuries I cannot afford." His eyes flicked to hers, vulnerability bare and raw. "And yet, standing here with you, I find myself wondering if I was wrong. If perhaps there is more to life than duty and responsibility. If perhaps," he trailed off, uncertainty touching the edges of his words in a way Vivian had never heard from him. "If perhaps there is room for something real," she prompted gently, stepping closer, her hand brushing against his. The touch was electric in its simplicity, a silent bridge between the man he had been and the man she now saw. He looked down at her hand, then back at her face, and for the first time, a hint of softness crossed his features. A quiet acknowledgement that perhaps, just perhaps, he had allowed someone to glimpse the heart he had long kept locked away. Vivian's own chest fluttered, hope and fear mingling in equal measure. This was the moment their carefully arranged world, so full of contracts, obligations, and social expectations, teetered on the edge of something entirely unexpected. "Perhaps," he said finally, voice still tentative, "there is more." Vivian smiled, the tension in her heart easing ever so slightly. "Then perhaps we can discover it together." For the first time that day, Nathaniel returned her smile, small, reluctant, but real. And as the autumn wind swept over the estate, carrying the scent of earth and harvest, Vivian felt a quiet certainty that their story was no longer defined by agreements or convenience, but by the fragile, daring possibility of something far more extraordinary: love. Only way to protect yourself, Nathaniel. From disappointment, from betrayal, from loneliness, she finished softly. He looked down at his hands, the lines of his face tight with memory. "Exactly. I convinced myself that love was a luxury I could not afford, that it would only bring pain. I buried myself in duty, in the estate, in obligations, anything to avoid trusting anyone again." Vivian stepped closer, her voice gentle but firm. "And yet here you are, standing before me, letting me see the man behind the title. That tells me you can trust someone, me. That maybe, just maybe, it's possible to let someone in without losing yourself." Nathaniel's grey eyes met hers, the storm of past hurts and present yearning colliding in their depths. "I don't know if I can," he admitted, voice rough, almost a whisper. "I've been hurt so many times. I don't want to risk losing you as well." "You won't lose me," Vivian said, placing her hand gently on his chest. "Not if we take it one day at a time. No pressure, no expectations beyond what we are ready for. Just honesty, and care, and learning how to share our lives together." For a long moment, he said nothing, simply letting her words sink in. Then slowly, almost cautiously, he took her hand in his. "One day at a time," he murmured, the weight of his past still present, but mingled now with a fragile hope. "Yes," Vivian replied, a small smile touching her lips. "One day at a time." And in that quiet, sunlit office surrounded by maps, ledgers, and the life he had built with tireless devotion, Nathaniel Hawthorne allowed himself to hope that the walls he had built around his heart might finally be lowered. That perhaps, at last, he could let someone see him, not just the Duke, but the man beneath, and maybe, with Vivian by his side, he could learn what it meant to love and be loved in return. The tension of years of guarded solitude began to ease, replaced by a tentative warmth. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time, Nathaniel felt the possibility of joy, and of a partnership that could be far more than the sum of convenience, duty, and obligation. Vivian squeezed his hand gently. Shall we take a walk around the gardens before lunch? I'd love to see more of your world, and perhaps share a bit of mine as well. Nathaniel's lips curved into a slow, genuine smile. I think I would like that very much. And together, they stepped into the sunlight, side by side, the first chapter of their true story beginning amidst the sprawling beauty of Ravencrest Hall. Wonder and disbelief. Quite certain, Vivian replied, her hand resting gently over her still flat stomach, a radiant smile lighting her face. The physician confirmed it yesterday. We're going to have a child, Nathaniel. For a moment, the world seemed to pause. Nathaniel's grey eyes widened, reflecting a mixture of awe, joy, and something deeper, gratitude that life had finally offered him a gift he had long thought impossible. A child, he repeated slowly, testing the words on his tongue as if making sure they were real. Our child. He rose from his chair and moved to her side, kneeling to take her hands in his. The gesture was reverent, intimate, and tender, the weight of years of guarded solitude and past heartbreak melting away in the warmth of this moment. 2 years ago, I offered you a marriage of convenience, he said, his voice thick with emotion, thinking I was giving you security in exchange for fulfilling a legal obligation. I never imagined. I never dared to hope that we would fall in love. Vivian's eyes shimmered with tears as she reached for him, her voice soft but unwavering. That I would find the happiness I believed I had lost forever. You gave me something I thought was lost to me forever, Vivian, Nathaniel whispered, pressing gentle kisses to her knuckles. You gave me hope and a love I never expected to find. And you gave me a partnership that goes far beyond what either of us imagined, Vivian said, her hand brushing through his dark hair. Together, we've built more than an estate, we've built a life, a home, and now a family. He looked at the stack of papers on the breakfast table, the plans for estate improvements, the new school for the village, the water collection system reports, all of it evidence of a life they had designed together. But none of that mattered more than the life they were about to bring into the world. I love you, Vivian, Nathaniel said, his voice steady now, full of certainty and warmth. I love you too, she replied, leaning down to kiss him softly. And I cannot wait to see what kind of father you will be. As they sat together in the golden morning light, their hearts intertwined and full of hope, Vivian reflected on the extraordinary journey that had led them here. What began as a marriage of convenience had transformed into a love story neither of them could have imagined, a story of healing, trust, and joy. And now, with the promise of new life, their love was only beginning. The future stretched before them, unwritten and full of possibilities, as two hearts once guarded opened fully to one another. If you like, I can also craft a closing paragraph or epilogue that elegantly ties together their story, leaving readers with a sense of lasting romance and hope for the years to come. Would you like me to do that? Nathaniel and Vivian sat together in the golden morning light, their hands entwined, hearts full, and eyes bright with hope. Outside, Ravenrest Hall shimmered in the soft sun, the garden swaying gently in the breeze, and the estate itself seemed to breathe with life once more. What had begun as a pragmatic arrangement had grown into something neither could have foreseen, a partnership built on trust, understanding, and love. The future stretched before them, full of promise. There would be sleepless nights and challenges, no doubt, raising a child, managing the estate, navigating the expectations of society, but now they would face it together, as equals, as partners, as a family. Nathaniel, once so cautious and guarded, had learned to open his heart, and Vivian, whose courage and compassion had first captured him, now stood beside him fully, willing to embrace all the joys and fears that life could bring. As they shared a quiet laugh over a small domestic detail, Nathaniel whispered, I never thought I could be this happy. You deserve it, Vivian replied, pressing a soft kiss to his temple. We've built it together. And in that moment, surrounded by the home they had made, the life they had chosen, and the love that had grown quietly but surely, they knew that this was only the beginning. The Duke of Ravenrest and his Duchess would not only inherit a title and an estate, they would inherit the joy of building a life that was truly their own, full of love, hope, and the laughter of a family yet to come. And as the sunlight spilled across the breakfast table, it illuminated more than the estate plans and reports, it illuminated a love that had blossomed against all odds, proving that sometimes the most unexpected beginnings lead to the most extraordinary endings.